Welcome to MassBio's weekly town hall with President and CEO Bob Coughlin. I'm Jennifer Nason, Senior Director of Communications for MassBio, and we're thrilled to have with us today Bruce Booth, who is partner with Atlas Venture and focuses on the discovery and development of novel medicines and therapeutic platforms. Welcome, Bruce. Welcome, Bob. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks, Jenny, and thank you to all of you for joining in today. These town hall updates have been amazing, so thank you for participating and thank you for continuing to engage. We're moving along just quite nicely in this industry and we'll continue to do so. I'm so excited to have our friend and colleague Bruce Booth on at our virtual town hall today. We're going to talk about where the industry's at from a finance standpoint, what's going on out there as it relates to our business and innovation. I can't think of anybody who knows more, and who's more widely followed, and who's more engaged than Bruce Booth from Atlas. So Bruce, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us here today.
Sure, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Perfect. Well, just a quick housekeeping. I'm going to dive in with some questions, but as always, we want this to be an interactive discussion. So audience, please jump in with questions throughout, and we'll get to as many as we can. All right, so just to get started, this first question is for you, Bruce. Can you just tell us a little bit about how the biopharma industry is doing in terms of VC investments and IPOs during this unprecedented time?
Sure. So let me start, I'll cover four things quite quickly. The overall markets, the IPO markets, venture capital, and then some of the recent news on the M&A front. On the market side, almost surprisingly, the biotech markets are flat for the year overall in the public markets, which, given the volatility we saw in April, is really quite a recovery. Over the last month. In fact, April was strong. We've had 11 IPOs. What's that, Bob?
It sounded like you froze a little bit there, Bruce. Are you close to your computer screen?
I am. It's the it might be the New Hampshire Wi-Fi though.
There you go. Okay, we can hear you now.
Good. So I was saying that the IPO market is really quite strong. We've had 11 biotech IPOs so far this year. 9 of them are still above their IPO prices. Really quite a strong year, even relative to 2019. There was only 12 IPOs in the first 4 months. And so we've seen lots of activity there. They've traded well in the aftermarket. And interestingly, the highest valuations really ever from a pre-money perspective. Almost close to 500 million was the average pre-money. On the venture side, the first quarter was the biggest for biotech venture capital ever. March, the largest month ever. April, the second biggest month in the last 20 years. I mean, it's really a remarkable amount of resilience in the overall venture capital funding markets. And then over the last 2 days, 2 strong M&A events in terms of over 100% premium, the purchase of Stemline, the purchase of Portola today. We're seeing renewed M&A interest on the part of our friends in Big Pharma. So overall, sort of a remarkably positive story relative to a macro economy that doesn't look as good. And that disconnect between the markets we can explore, but it's one of the interesting things about biotech is that we really aren't reliant on or sensitive to some of the shocks around consumer demand, unemployment, overall macro, because what we're really focused on is advancing medicines and getting that data currency that is so important in early stage biotech.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's incredible to see, how well the industry is doing amidst all of this and when other industries are struggling. I mean, Bob, do you have anything to add to that? I know you often tell that story about how, in the 07 to 09 recession, it was a similar story.
Yeah, I always talk about how from 07 to, well, actually 07 all the way to 2012, we basically reinvented the model of drug discovery so that we could continue to grow with no IPO market. We did that by utilizing the tools that were in the Massachusetts Life Science Center in the 10-year billion-dollar initiative to recruit big pharma companies here to promote external innovation. We were able to grow. The IPO market came back in 2012 and here we are, right? So this will be another opportunity for us to get through this. But I want to thank Bruce because, I don't know, for any of you viewers out there, I don't know if you follow on Twitter at LifeSciVC, which is Bruce's Twitter handle. Follow it. And Bruce, I'm going to tell you right now in front of all these people who are watching, I go on Bloomberg Radio, I do television interviews. A lot of the times I'm giving us the financial state of the industry. And I think this is the perfect opportunity for me to let everybody know that the way I get my information is to follow your Twitter handle. I read what you write all the time. And I'm not going to say I use it as if it's my own, because that would not be appropriate, but I do use it a lot. So now I'm giving you credit in front of all these folks. So to folks on board, please follow Bruce on Twitter if you want to get this sort of information, because I don't think there's anybody out there that is as close to what's going on at that, in the front row seat of what's going on as it relates to innovation and discovery and new company creation in our industry. So thank you for that, Bruce. I'm a big fan.
Awesome. Well, thank you both. It's a good positive story. So just shifting to maybe a little bit more of the challenges side that COVID is bringing. I mean, what are some of the unique challenges, especially that for emerging biotechs in terms of operating, doing lab work and raising capital? Maybe Bruce, you could start.
I'd say fundamentally R&D execution is the name of the game, and that's where COVID is having its biggest impacts. If we think about the spectrum on the preclinical and discovery side, a lot of our companies are actually weathering the storm okay. Starting in China, there were some delays that started in February, but by and large, most of them have gotten back on track. Global CRO footprints, being able to advance those preclinical animal models and such, has been something that I think all of us are pleased with how they've come back online. I think where the real bottleneck and pinch point right now is around those early clinical programs where a biotech is dependent on getting that next piece of clinical data. They're in phase 1 or early phase 2 studies, and all the medical centers around the United States are essentially closed for business. And so the ability to do clinical work is a big challenge. And so if you're in that world, you're early clinic, you're in development and you need to raise money, or you're thinking about raising money, that's where the trade-offs start to happen of how do we put resourcing into our lead programs to get those to data inflection points? How do we think about extending runway to be able to get through some of these delays? And I think every board in a clinical stage biotech company today is helping their management teams wrestle down those questions.
Absolutely. And we actually just have a follow-up question on that from the audience for you, Bruce. They're asking specifically, what's your sense of follow-on private financings for discovery stage startups? Caution, more diligence, or similar to the end of 2019?
Yeah, so I think we're continuing to see those financings get done just in our own portfolio. Accent, a discovery early stage company, raised a very nice Series B round. We had another close that's not yet announced in that very same vein. Fundraising is never easy when you're the management team that has to go around and pitch to investors. But, there is ample amounts of capital sitting on the sidelines, eagerly looking for innovative new companies to invest in. And the fact that April was such a large month, $1.5 billion got deployed in biotech in the US just in April. That's a staggeringly large amount, well above the normal monthly median. And so I think that goes to show lots of financings are still happening. Now, you might argue that they're lagging, right? Most of the diligence to close a deal in January started in December, January, February in order to close now. But I'm not seeing the pace of conversations slowing. You're seeing investors quickly adapt to virtual diligence processes. Interestingly, of the IPOs that just got out in April, there were 4 very nicely priced and traded IPOs. They all had virtual roadshows, right? Instead of doing, a couple of weeks on the road, they had 5-day virtual roadshows where they saw every investor and they didn't have to travel all over the country. I think most management teams would really love to see the virtual roadshow continue post-COVID.
Do you think it will continue, Bruce? Do you think that's something that's good that could come out of that? Will it continue?
I am doubtful that people won't want the human interaction in some of those meetings, but I think you might be able to do a lot more of your investor outreach through this virtual component, and that'll save everyone, time and money and travel costs. So
absolutely.
Yeah, you know, we've actually moved a lot of our programming, almost all of it right now, to virtual. And you know, Bob, as you know, the startup industry is the backbone of our cluster in Massachusetts. I think something like 70% of our membership is actually small to medium-sized biotech. So maybe Bob, you can tell us a little bit about how we can continue to support the startup industry and how we can continue to foster that collaboration between big pharma and emerging biotechs. And then Bruce, would love for you to add on.
Yeah, and Jenny, it's a great question, and we're learning more and we're getting better at this as we go. And like we were just alluding to, hopefully some of these best practices will continue through and carry on when we get back to which will be known as the new norm, right? We know enough about drug discovery in this industry, whether it happens to be new diagnostics, new antivirals or therapies or antibody treatments, as well as vaccines, that we're not going to have a fix overnight. So, the reason MassBio set up our COVID-19 resource page on our newly launched massbio.org website was so that we could share information to the small, medium, and large companies. And Bruce, as you know, we're only as good as the information that we have, and we've done a tremendous job sharing with one another. I mean, at MassBio, we immediately started surveying member companies to find out, okay, one, what do you have for PPE so we can share it and donate it to our frontline healthcare heroes that were really in the middle of it right up until about last weekend, right? And as an industry, I'm so proud what we did with the supply hub. That being said, we weren't only gathering information about PPE, we were finding out what are the best practices. What are people doing as it relates to back to work, or what are people thinking as it relates to back to work testing? What are the best practices to get essential lab and life science workers back to work today? Because as you know, we fought very hard so that we could remain essential workforce, so that this amazing science, not just for COVID-19, but all the other indications that we were working on would continue to go. It makes me think of early on, Bruce, because you're on this call, and it's important to note, we've also invited Jody Morrison to come on board and be a speaker at a future town hall, because it's amazing how she took the initiative with Atlas portfolio companies to pull CEOs from your portfolio together that grew and grew and grew. And now it's CEOs from all over the industry that are on this call every Monday. That's how we start our week. And we'll talk more about that at a future town hall, but it really gives us the opportunity to communicate. So back to your question, Jenny, what are we doing at MassBio? We're going to make sure that all of our professional development forums can be done virtually. We're talking about how you can have events virtually moving forward, and we're working on that. But when you look at our innovation services group, what we do around Mass Connect, massconnect.pi, and massconnect.dh, and all of the, when you're an organization who it's your goal is to pull people together so that they can collaborate, communicate, and we call it connect, convene, connect, catalyze. That's what we do for company creation, but we need to do it now virtually. So you can rest assured that all of our innovation services programming and whatnot is being transformed to a virtual component. We're going to have partnering days, just like we did in the past, only they're going to be done virtually. And we need to do it because we can't take pause right now, ladies and gentlemen, because that will affect pause later, and it will adversely affect patients who are waiting for therapies, right? And we're all about the patients. So we're smart enough to figure out how to keep going through this. We're smart enough to beat it, and we're going to. So I don't know. I get excited, Jenny. I apologize, and I apologize. But we're doing a great job.
Yeah, no, Bob, that's great. And I'm glad you called out what Jody's doing with the sort of grassroots component to that. I remember in early March, just as people were talking about that ill-fated Biogen meeting, and people were wondering, should we be working from home? Atlas, we went work from home pretty early in that process. But very quickly, our CEOs were all asking each other and us, like, what do you do? What should we do? How should we do this? And so Jody took the initiative, and it very quickly, the grassroots component of CEOs wanting to engage on this just exploded.
You bet.
In the beginning, it was multiple times a week. It's now that one called kickoff Monday mornings. But there are sub-teams. There are sub-teams that are discussing what's the back to, how do we get folks back into the labs? What's the testing have to look like? What's that sort of, whether it's PCR test or serology test, how are we going to do all of that? Then there's the operational pieces of this, space and other components. You guys have obviously been instrumental in a number of those meetings now and appreciate the support for it. But I'd say what it really is the grassroots piece of CEOs cooperating, sharing insight and best practice. And I think if there's any lasting positive change, that's one of the things we'd like to see continue.
Yeah, and Jenny, if I could add to that, the collaboration, okay, amongst all these smaller to mid-sized companies has been amazing. I've been on calls this morning. Obviously, there's some great news coming out of Pfizer today, but the amount of calls that we've been involved with all of, the medium and especially the larger companies that are engaged in vaccine research right now, I never, ever, ever would have imagined that the level of cooperation and sharing that is happening from large pharma companies right now, I never would have thought this would happen in our lifetime. I also never, ever would have thought that the most important thing to the world's economy right now is a vaccine, right? I never would have thought that. But now to see our industry pull together and cooperate and collaborate and share ideas, and it's not about competition. It's about everybody truly being in this together. And they all hope another company does it quicker, right? Because we're not going to get back to the way things were until there is a vaccine. So it really is refreshing to see that.
Yeah, I think, everyone we talk to says there's going to be a lot of positives from kind of lasting change from this pandemic. So, what else? Clearly, the way we network, the way we work together. What other changes do you see this having long term? Even around clinical trials and how we deal with patients.
Yeah, no, I think undoubtedly we're going to see impacts that last across multiple components of the business. And one of the things that I think is interesting is, normally an event that brings people from all over the world together here in Boston for a scientific advisory board meeting, that takes weeks to plan and weeks to organize and get everybody's travel schedule. One of my companies just did one of those essentially 3 days out. They said, hey, is everybody free this 2-hour block? Everybody joined. And so you're seeing different ways to be even more efficient than we used to be by bringing people together virtually faster. And I think you're going to see that ripple through, whether it's clinical advisory boards, virtual site initiations for on the clinical side, things like that. We're going to continue to see, this sort of gigantic move to virtual really affect lots of components of the business. One might be office space. And so if you think about the Boston and Cambridge office space challenge, office and lab space challenge, it's been incredibly tight, right? The vacancy rate is close to 0%. If you can spend more time in flexible work arrangements where a certain portion of your team is frequently working from home, well, then the office footprint that you actually need could go down. That's not to say that people won't all be cycling into the office at different times, because let's face it, the human interaction at the water cooler is important. But there are new models for how one might think about this that are likely going to have some lasting impacts on, overall scale and footprint in the office and lab environments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bob, please add to.
This isn't something that we've pre-discussed or written about, so I apologize if I'm putting anyone on the spot here. But one of the things that I admire so much about you, Bruce, is your willingness to take on difficult conversations and talk about how we can do better as an industry. One of the things that has really been front and center in my life over the last several years was the not so great image of our industry and it's mind-blowing to me because I just think of my personal situation, the fact that this industry has developed a therapy that's actually keeping my son with cystic fibrosis alive right now. So I love this industry. I think this industry is doing angels work. And for me to have the job to deal with, and our folks at MassBio constantly dealing with folks on the policy side of the spectrum, not having a great thoughts about our industry, I've seen that all shift. And that's great, right? It's horrible that it takes this horrible pandemic and crisis to make people realize that, wow, it is going to be the life sciences industry that solves this problem. But I get nervous, and I want to know what your thoughts are. How do we ensure that as an industry, we handle this right so that the reputation of our industry will be what it should be after this, and not a situation where, oh, this is big pharma trying to make more money. Right? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Totally. I mean, look, science will lead us out of this pandemic at the end of the day. And that science, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure we're holding that to a high standard. You know, it's in times like this that desperation and hope can affect, you know, how things are positioned and marketed. You know, does that drug work in this setting? Well, I heard an anecdote that really does work. You know, anecdotes are not data. And so let's do proper clinical trials. You know, the recent, you know, NIH-funded remdesivir trial certainly looks promising. That drug likely has an impact in certain settings. We'd like to see all the medicines that we're going to be pushing forward go through clinical studies that hold that high standard. And I think that's a really important part of this. We have to make sure to call out snake oil when we see it. You know, you call out the people that are over promoting inappropriate therapies for COVID, and there are, of course, people trying to take advantage of that. But as an industry, if we can lead with science first, you know, and take a thoughtful view of how to think about drug pricing in these settings and such, which I think Gilead is doing, I wait to see sort of how, you know, how they're going to be pricing remdesivir. You know, it's anyone's guess at this point. But I think longer term, the more we can emphasize science, data, and a thoughtfulness around science leading us out of this pandemic, the better.
Great points. Wonderful. Thank you for that.
Absolutely. We have a question from the audience. Bruce, this is more for you. Ben is asking, given the broad reach of COVID and the number of people affected, is it possible this spurs further investment from family offices and high net worth individuals?
Yeah, I'd say this has probably magnified their interest in investing in biotech, but over the last few years, it has significantly increased. And so a lot of the more sophisticated family offices have been participating in direct investments, both in later stage biotech companies and in venture capital funds that are focused on biotech. We've seen a lot of interest from those folks in wanting to co-invest in deals with us, for instance. But I think you're going to continue to see that level of interest. I think part of the swell in why we're seeing so much funding in private biotech is in part because over the last couple of years, those types of family offices see the important double bottom line of investing in biotech, which is, you know, you can do well by doing good. And I think that's a really important part of the biotech investment thesis.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So Bruce, you're working with these startup companies every day. You're advising them, you're, helping them get to that next stage to reach patients. What is your advice to those, small biotechs? Like I said, that's the majority of MassBio's membership. Just what is your advice to them in navigating this situation and in trying to, create lasting change that's positive from this? I mean, what's your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, again, it comes back to, my firm's mantra of science first. If you can really focus on bringing innovative new science from bench to bedside, that's where the real lasting impact of our business comes. Thinking about financing environments of how you're going to do that, thinking about organizational structures, virtual versus hybrid lab virtual models and things like that. They're all part of the execution process, but really that relentless focus on high quality science, hold yourself to a high standard, be disciplined. I think one of the worries in a market when you have such abundant capital flows, both privately and publicly, is that both management teams, boards, and investors start to lose discipline around saying, you know what, we shouldn't deploy capital against that project. We should put it on this project. And we all fall in love with our babies. But I think it is important to stay disciplined in times like this of allocating capital to those opportunities that have, the potential for biggest impact.
Absolutely. And Bob, I'm going to shift that over to you. I mean, what's your advice, maybe more from kind of a business standpoint and a morale standpoint for these companies?
I'm going to get a little bit philosophical here, Jenny, and you've seen it because we've been trying to manage the MassBio team of, 48 to 50 employees on our team. And, for me, I think it's important that we realize that, we're going to get through this, right? We're smart enough. The science will get us through this. And it's important that we realize, we should be grateful, one, that the industry that we're in, because we're the most important industry to get us through this right now. And again, frontline healthcare workers, true heroes, keeping people alive and caring for the people that got sick. But as we move forward and we're thinking about how we're going to dig ourselves out of this, our industry is playing a major role, and we should feel good about that. I also think that we need to, for our own mental wellness and our own sanity, it's important to not put timelines on ourselves that aren't realistic, or there's so many things that we can't control here. And just like I said to our own team at our last staff meeting, Jenny, I mean, I'm not going to say that, we're going to be back to work. Look, it was May 4th and now it's May 18th. Let's not put deadlines on ourselves. Let's get through this the best we can, and we're going to get back to things when we can, provided that people will be safe, okay? And until then, we're going to figure it out as we go. And I tell these companies, let's try to, with any adverse things that happen in our lives, it's about how you react to it. And can you take this horrible situation and try to find some good and opportunity out of it? And we are. Look at all the good that has come from us working together virtually. Look at all the good that is coming from folks working more collaboratively. Look at all the good when we stop thinking about just money and putting the emphasis on science, like Bruce just said. So I really think that, let's all keep doing what we're doing. We do this because we care about people and we care about patients. I had a very mature conversation with my son last weekend, and he kind of, painted a picture for me that I might not have truly understood. He said, Dad, I've lived like this, worrying about my own illness my whole life. Because now all my friends understand what it feels like to need a medicine so that they don't get sick. Like, who would think of that? Everybody in the world right now is a patient in need of a medicine that can keep them from dying. Right? That's what we were doing every day before COVID-19. We were solving unmet medical need for some of the most rarest of rare diseases. To those patients, every day there was worry of a COVID-19 type thing for them. So let's be, let's have a better sense of gratitude. Let's be more aware. Let's be more present, and let's keep doing what we do. And we're going to all be better for it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Bob. And, it's so important to hear from the patient right now. And that's why for next week's town hall, we've actually shifted the time. It's going to happen at 11:30 instead of 11, because we're going to have a patient join Bob, a patient with cystic fibrosis, to really talk about, what it's like going through this now, when you have that extra level of, you're scared, you're vulnerable, you're the at-risk population, and what can we do to support those patients? So thank you for that. And Bruce, thank you so much for joining us. It was so great to hear your insights, and we really appreciate your time and all the support for the startup industry you provide.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Bruce. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for your leadership. And again, thanks for all the amazing work that you do. I hope the folks who have tuned in today truly enjoyed hearing from Bruce. You're a major player in our industry, and we can't thank you enough for that.
Thank you very much for having me.
Perfect. Well, everyone, tune in next week and have a great week.